As you know, I'm a Jesuit, so I'd like us to maybe recite the prayer that St. Ignatius has all Jesuits recite as often as we can. It's a total emptying of ourselves. And so, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my entire will. All that I have and possess, you have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Dispose of it wholly according to your will. Give me only your love and your grace, and that's enough for me. Amen. As you know, Pope Francis was and is the first Jesuit ever to be elected a pope. And thank you. And he was formed exactly like I was. We all went 2 years of novitiate, philosophy studies. We taught or worked in Jesuit apostolates, living with Jesuits, discerning whether or not this was the path we wanted to take. And then we studied theology and then were ordained. The basis of our formation are the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And he has a bunch of pre-notes before we even begin them. It is more for the directors, but it is also something that bases how we preach, how we minister. And the first principle and foundation is note number 23 in the exercises. And it says that we humans are created to praise, reverence, and serve Almighty God, and in so doing, save our souls. And everything else in this universe and world is created in order to help us attain our final goal, which is oneness with God, salvation. So, to the extent that it helps us come to God, we use it. And to the extent it doesn't, we don't. And so discernment is all about what leads us to God and what doesn't lead us to God. It's as simple as that. But so many people don't practice it. For example, I know that you had some speaker last week talk about social justice. And I think that a lot of people were disappointed because he took a tack that's a little bit more on the political part of social justice. But I'm going to just kind of help you understand that a Jesuit, our way of proceeding is to promote a faith that does justice. But what does justice mean? It does not mean what America thinks justice is. American justice is about fairness and about equality under the law. That's not biblical justice. Biblical justice is right relationship. Example, I asked a mom of 6 kids one day, which one of the 6 kids she loved the most. How many of you think that's a just question? Totally unjust, right? But she was incredibly wise. Her answer illustrates exactly what biblical justice is about. She says, I love them all the same, but who needs me the most right now gets my attention. That's biblical justice. So if we're going to look at this country and being a Catholic Christian in this country, and you want to look at social justice, who needs us the most right now? And we extend our love and compassion and service to them. Then we're practicing justice. Yes, it might overlap with some politics. Yes, it might overlap with empowerment, but ultimately that is what justice is about. Who needs us the most right now, and we give them the attention. So what I'd like us to do, I'm going to give you a little bit of information as we lead into mercy and forgiveness, which is my main theme today. The sub-theme is becoming men and women for others. Okay? So in other words, faith is not a noun. Faith is a verb. Love is not just a noun. Love is also a verb. It's easy to say, I love you. But show me in your actions that you love me or that I love you. You show it by action. Faith is not just what we do in the creed. The creed is a set of beliefs. Faith is lived. It's dynamic. So when we come to church, we come as disciples in order to learn. And when you're sent at the end of Mass, you leave as apostles. The word apostle means someone who is sent, right? And what are we sent to do? To apply what we learned in the Word of God. So I'm going to be giving you some series of stories and hopefully weave things in and out so that we can understand a little bit more about how to become better men and women for others and how to be people that can promote a faith that does justice, which is what evangelization really is all about. So I'd like us to examine and to grow into that. I'm going to use a couple of stories and some comments. 'Twas beaten and marred, and the auctioneer felt it was a waste of his time to auction off the old violin, but he still held it up with a smile. "What am I bid, good folk?" he cried. "Who'll start with an offer? $1, $1, $2, $2, $3, $3 once, $3 twice." He started to wind up to close the deal when from the back an old gentleman said, "Wait a minute." He walked all the way down. As he was walking, he takes out his hanky and opens it up, asks for the violin, takes the violin, dusts it off, tightens the strings, cleans the bow and tightens the bow, and then he starts to play an angelically beautiful tune. Everybody's like this. And when he finishes, he hands the violin back to the auctioneer, who receives it almost like a newborn baby, holds it, and says, "Now what am I bid for the violin?" $1,000, $1,000, $2,000, $2,000, $3,000, $3,000 once, $3,000 twice, sold for $3,000. And the whole place exploded. And then someone said, "Wait a minute, I don't get it. What changed its value?" And very quickly came the reply. "And many a person with life not in tune, marred and scarred with and by sin, is auctioned cheap to the blinded ones, much like the old violin. Then the master comes, and the foolish never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the master's hand." Martin Buber, who is my philosophical and theological hero, wrote a fantastic book in the 1930s, just as Hitler was taking over in Germany. He was from Germany. It is called I and Thou, and it's used by many, many psychologists and many, many areas of philosophy and theology today still. He says that we humans can communicate in two ways, either as I and thou or I and it. I, thou means that two eyes, two peers, they consider each other as sacred gifts from God. And so the word thou usually is a formal word, right? And it's usually holy. So I treat you as a holy gift from God, and you treat me the same. That is I and thou. What happens between us is really dialogue. We speak with each other. One takes their turn speaking, the other listens, and then when one finishes, the other speaks and is listened to. Two, it's a dialogue. I and it, on the other hand, the I considers oneself more important than the other, and so treats the other like an it, like a thing. And what do we tend to do with things? We use them, and what do we do when we tire of them? Throw them away, right? Well, I invented a verb that describes that process. It's called thingify. And we like to thingify people. You know, like the violin, we can treat people like old violins ready to be used and discarded. No value at all. We're seeing it even in our political world today. A lot of thingifying going on, a lot of blame going around. How many of you like to be treated like things? How many of you like to be manipulated? Not one hand went up. Good. Because if you are, then you're one heck of a masochist. Now imagine how the violin felt in the early part of that auction. It took the master's hand to play the violin as it was created to be played, in order to perform as it was created to perform. What changed its value was the master playing it. And then that changed the price that people were willing to pay for such a sacred instrument. So my question to us is, do our lives raise the value of the people that God blesses us with meeting every day of our lives? Are they happy and excited when they have encountered us? Do they leave our encounter different? Do we leave our encounter with them differently or not? So keep that on your mind, okay, on the side. I have another story. A water bearer in China had 2 large pots, each hanging on the ends of a pole which he carried across his neck. One was perfectly made, the other had a crack in it. And so he would go and walk down to the river every day and fill up both pots with water. But by the time he got up to the master's house, he could only deliver 1.5 pots of water. When this went on every day for a long time, and the perfect pot would always diss the imperfect pot. See, I always deliver a full pot of water, and you only deliver half. And so that poor little cracked pot felt about this big. And he started to talk to the water bearer, and he was bemoaning the fact that he was so imperfect and could never do what he was originally created to do. And so the water bearer said, "Don't be ashamed of yourself. Did you notice on the way back from the river that there's only flowers on your side of the road? You see, I've known you've had a crack for all along. And so what I did is I walked back. I knew you were spilling water, but you were spilling water where I planted seeds all the way down. And it's those seeds that were able to allow flowers to grow. And when they are ready, I cut them and put them on the master's table. And so don't worry about your imperfection. I took that into account. But without your cracked pot, with your inability to deliver the full amount of water, you're still able to water and bring beauty to the table of my master. And so, to all my cracked pot family and friends, remember to smell the flowers. Many of us fail to see that whatever cracks we may have developed over time, that God can and does use them to create something beautiful. We are all cracked pots, and yet God can water the seeds God planted along the side of the crack that we carry. Can we allow those around us to water the seeds along their side? Do we help them accept their own cracks as God-given and God-usable? What a wonderful garden we can have if we accept each other's cracks as a source and an instrument of beauty. When we can treat each other as sacred gifts from God, we act as if God is our master violinist, and God plays angelic tunes with our individual notes. God also plays and makes beautiful flowers. And remember that it takes 3 notes to make a chord, and when you play those 3 notes, you can still hear the individual sounds, but they sound like one. And that's a great explanation of the Trinity that we worship. I wanted to share a little something about the history of our theology in the church, because it really does have something to say about our own attitude towards sin, asking and giving forgiveness, giving mercy and being merciful. And we need to kind of understand a little bit the backgrounds. If you remember, in 1519, Martin Luther nailed to the wall of the cathedral the reasons why he was leaving the church. He was an Augustinian monk, and he was tired of seeing the abuses of the hierarchy. He's tired of seeing the abuses in the people of God and how they were being taught and evangelized. And so he decided that it was enough, and he was leaving, and he was forming his own church. That's where we have the Lutherans. And a lot of others went his way as well. John Calvin and Zwingli and all of the Protestant denominations like the Baptists, the Anabaptists, and all that, they all decided around the same time, and that started what was called the Protestant Reformation. Well, the popes in those days were really worried about how many people were being taken away from the fold, and so they looked for a systematic kind of teaching so that they could counter the points that the Protestant reformers were challenging the Roman Catholic Church about. And so there were 2 saints, very key individuals, who were contemporaries at the University of Paris. Happens to also be the same university where Ignatius studied years later. St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican. Bonaventure was a Franciscan. They both taught theology. They both had a system of theology. They both had a way, an image of God that functioned in their systems. The one that we still have today, and it's being taught in all the seminaries, is basically a lot using the writings of Thomas Aquinas. Now, I've run into a lot of philosophers who say that what was being taught as Thomistic theology is really not Thomas. It doesn't say that. It's what people say about what Thomas said. So what I'm going to say here is what most people have been taught about what Thomas has taught. And so if you look at it, what happened is that Bonaventure had the problem of having to replace a saint, because St. Francis of Assisi died while he was a professor in Paris. And so his order, his community, elected him to be the next head of the entire Franciscan order, which he reluctantly said yes, because he was reluctant because he loved to teach theology. Now, during that time, most of his writings were lost. And so the only thing that the church hierarchy had at their disposal was Aquinas. Now, what's the difference between both of those saints? One, in the way Thomas is taught, humanity is basically flawed, filled with cracks, so to speak. And we are in total need of redemption. When I say flawed, I mean basically we are sinners, and really with an emphasis with sinners with a capital S. We were all taught in that kind of theology and are still being taught in that kind of theology. In fact, it saddens me that in the new missal, we went back to it by having to beat our breasts every time we do the Confiteor. Through my fault, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. We went back to that. I don't understand. But anyway, it goes with this, that we're basically sinners. How interesting that Pope Francis said, yes, we're sinners, but we're not all corrupt. His theology is much more like Bonaventure and mine. But anyway, what Thomas is saying is that we totally need redemption. He focuses on original sin and the removal of that and the effects of original sin, and humanity, because we're fallen, constantly need redemption, constantly need to receive the sacrament of reconciliation. And we were all raised to go to confession on a regular basis. And if you went to Catholic school, it was every Friday. And everything was a mortal sin, right or wrong. And so when we went to confession, I still have to laugh. I would look at those lists of sins that we were supposed to look over in our examination of conscience, and I would say, I haven't done any of this, but I have to confess something. So I'd sit there and I'd go, okay, Father, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I fornicated a number of times. Here I am, 10 years old, and I'm just sitting there. Now that I look back, that priest had to be laughing his butt off. And I'm not alone. I know a lot of people who used to make up sins just to be able to not have sister pull your ear because we were all supposed to go to confession. But it's all based on this, that we're all fallen in need of grace. And so, there's no way that we could ever imagine that someone's incapable of sinning in the way that we know sin is all about. Now, look at St. Bonaventure. Bonaventure's theology is based differently. Humanity is basically graced. You stop and think about the studies of any culture, even pre-Judaism, pre-Christianity. You look in the caves of all of these indigenous cultures that existed thousands of years before Judaism even came to be, and they all worshipped outside of themselves. They worshiped the sun. They worshiped the moon. They worshiped the stars. You go to Mexico, you go to Egypt, you see the pyramids, you see everything. It's all for the worship of deities beyond themselves. That is called grace, people. We are graced to be able to have a desire to be with something outside of us that we know at least had something to do with our creation. Well, Bonaventure said, God so loved the idea of you and me that God created us from his loving heart in order for love. So we are made in the image and likeness of God, and God is a creator God. God creates out of love for love. And so sin is, yes, it's a breach of our covenant of love, but we're not flawed. The reason why we sin is because we badly use the freedom that God gave to each one of us. And we make the mistake of choosing badly in order to think that this is going to make us happy. And so sometimes we make bad choices based on a false notion of what makes us happy. Okay? But the idea is that we want to be happy, and we want to be caring and loving, and that is how we normally are. But we're taught in a whole other way. I call Aquinas the via negativa, and I call Bonaventure the via positiva. That's my own terms. There are other theologians might name it differently. But basically is I come to God by eliminating sin in my life, which is Aquinas. And the other one is I come to God because of my loving heart. Love dictates how I'm supposed to live. That's positive, total via positiva. One is we consider ourselves its before God, and the other is I am a thou because God made me a thou. We're made in the image and likeness of God, so right from our creation, we are thous. We're sacred in God's eyes, and we're supposed to treat each other as sacred. It's a whole different way of thinking, but imagine the image of God you may have in the two ways of acting. Both ways lead to God, but one leaves you fearful, the other leaves you joyful. Pardon me, but I choose the joyful path. And Francis's first exhortation to the church was the joy of the gospel. And the idea of how are we supposed to then undo when we recognize that we do sin, that we do cause harm, that we are estranged from God. And I said that faith is shown in actions. And so one of the ways of showing that we are thinking about others other than ourselves are what we call the corporal works of mercy. You find them in Isaiah 58. You find them in Luke 4. They are part of Jesus' own mission. You know, you see them in Matthew 25, right? For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Right? All of those are direct service with the poor. And when you do this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you're doing it to me. So this is how to undo anything that we have done wrong, is do it from a loving, caring heart. We extend ourselves for those who need us the most right now. Now, some of us might have a little more education or more up here that God gave, but it's not just to be hoarded, it's to be shared. And so we have the spiritual works of mercy. This, again, is a way of showing others the way to God through how we treat them as sacred beings. Counsel those who have doubts, and don't worry about their doubts. Everybody doubts. I couldn't believe how many people went off on a deep end when they discovered the diary of Mother Teresa, and it said in there that she had doubts. How can a saint have doubts? How can a saint not have doubts? Excuse me. You want to see doubter? Thomas, Peter, the 12. They weren't around when Jesus was crucified. Only one or two were. Come on, where'd that come from? Doubts. So, everybody doubts. But we make a big deal out of it? No, just when someone has doubts, listen to them and help them through it. Instruct the ignorant. Well, those who don't know need to be taught. But there's a way of teaching. You can teach and call them dolts, or you can teach and just hopefully watch. There's nothing better. I was a high school and a junior high teacher. There's nothing more exciting than to watch the light go on. When a child discovers the answer and discovers the way for themselves, you're not giving it to them. So you parents who do your homework for your kids, you're not helping. I'm sorry. It's better to teach them to find out on their own and to guide them with questions. Admonish sinners. Now this is great because we have some people who love to point fingers. Father, I saw that you said this, and you're supposed to say this. And who made you my pope? Who made you my superior? But they love to. And I said, be careful when you point a finger, sir, because 3 point back. So when you admonish the sinner, purify your intention, purify your motivation before you do it, so that you don't come across like a jerk. You know, you want them to right the ship, right the path, but the way you do it is as important as what you say. I once had a parishioner who, God, was he critical. And he was right. Most of the time he was very, very right about what he was saying. But I said, you know, when you tell the truth and you accompany the truth with a slap in the face, the people only remember the slap. They don't remember the truth. So eliminate those pointing fingers and the slaps when you admonish your sinners. Forgive offenses. How easy is that, huh? How many of you find it easy to forgive somebody who harms you or who disrespects you? Very few people do. But that's part and parcel of who we're supposed to be. Be patient with those who do us harm. Boy, it's hard to be patient with our politics today because a lot of harm is being done in the name of being right. And we also pray for the living and the dead. Well, that goes without saying. We pray as if everything depends upon us and work as if everything depends upon God. When you do that, you're not far from the kingdom of God. I have another story before I go to this, the one that's on the screen. A young woman went to her mother and told her about her life and how things were so hard. She didn't know what she was going to do to make it, and she wanted to give up. She was tired of fighting. She was tired of struggling. It seems that when one problem is solved, a new one would arise. Her mother said nothing, but she took her to the kitchen. She filled 3 pots with water and placed each of them on a high flame. And soon the 3 pots began to boil. Still, she has said nothing. In the first, she placed carrots. In the second, she placed eggs. In the last, she placed ground coffee beans. She let them sit and boil for a while, again, without saying a word. After about 15 minutes or so, she turned off the burners. She fished the carrots out and placed them in a bowl of cool water. She got the eggs out and placed them in a bowl of cool water. And then she ladled the coffee and placed them in a bowl just as is. Turning to her daughter, she asked, "What do you see?" "Carrots, eggs, and coffee." Her mother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did and noted that they were soft. The mother then asked the daughter to take an egg and break it. After pulling off the shell, she observed it was a hard-boiled egg. Finally, the mother asked her daughter to sip the coffee, and she smiled and tasted with a rich aroma. And then the daughter asked, "What does this mean, Mom?" Her mother explained that each of these objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water. Each reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to boiling water for 15 minutes, it softened and it became weak. The egg, we all know, is fragile on the inside. Its thin outer shell protects its liquid interior. But after sitting for 15 minutes in boiling water, its insides become hard. Now, the ground coffee beans were unique, however. As they were boiling in water, they changed the water. "So which are you?" she asked her daughter. "When adversity knocks at your door, how do you respond? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? Think of this, which am I?" Am I the carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity, I wilt and become soft and lose my strength? Am I the egg that has a malleable heart, but changes with the heat? Did I have a fluid spirit, but after a breakup or a financial hardship, a death, or some other trial, have I become hard and stiff? Does my shell look the same, but on the inside, am I bitter and tough with a stiff spirit and a hardened heart? Or am I like the coffee bean? The bean actually changes the hot water. The very same circumstance that brings pain when the water gets hot, it releases fragrance and flavor. If you are like the bean, when things are at their worst, you get better and you change the situation around you. When the hour is darkest and trials are their greatest, do you elevate yourself to a new level? So how do you handle adversity? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? So she told her daughter, may you have enough happiness to make you sweet, enough trials to make you strong, enough sorrow to keep you human, enough hope to make you happy. The happiest people don't necessarily have the best of everything. They just make the best of everything that comes along their way. The brightest future is always based on a forgotten past. You can't go forward in life until you let go of your past failures and heartaches. When you were born, you were crying and everybody else around you was smiling. May you live your life so that at the end, you're the one who's smiling and everybody around you is crying. It's easier to build a child than to repair an adult. May we all be coffee. It's important for us to understand that we're all going to go through trials, but really how we address it, how we confront it, shows whether we are people of faith or not. And faith is not just beliefs. If you just have beliefs and you have trials, beliefs go out the window. But if you have faith, you trust that this too shall pass and that you can make it. And that you realize that you cannot do it alone. That is why we have a church. That is why we build community. That is why the greatest of parishes is a community of communities. I don't know about your parish here, but my parish used to identify themselves as, well, I'm part of the 11 o'clock Mass, I'm part of the 8:30 Mass, I'm the 5:30 Saturday Mass, and which at first you tend to laugh, but at the same time, it was great because they felt proud to be part of that group, and that group was a community for them, and it was what helped sustain them in their faith. They could go to them anytime and talk about what was going on, and they could support each other and ask for prayers. Again, we pray as if everything depends upon us, okay? Any questions on this? What I'm going to do in a few minutes is to hand out, or actually it's in the back. On the way out, you can get these sheets. I have a couple of sheets. I'm going to give you homework. I'm not going to be around to collect it. It's not going to be on the test, except your own test. As I shared in other parishes before, one of the things I love to do is to prepare couples for marriage. But it's not just the marriage, it's also family, because it's the basis of a good, healthy couple that can have good, healthy children if they truly understand what the difference is between commitment and obligation and between formation and indoctrination. There are two ways to educate. And in the church, there are two ways to educate. One is indoctrination, and the other is formation. I'd like to say that most Jesuits are about formation, but I know that there are an awful lot of Catholic hierarchy and individuals who are more about indoctrination. And I'm going to just share very simply what the difference is. The difference is both teach right and wrong. The difference is in how we hope that people choose what's right. In indoctrination, we stress the fact that this is right and this is wrong, and you're going to go to hell if you do wrong. And they talk a lot about hell, and they talk a lot about the devil, and they talk a lot about sin. Formation is this is right and this is wrong, and we pray and hope that you choose right, that you choose to do good, because when you do good, you don't have time to do bad. Okay? It's a different way of teaching. How do you teach your kids? You can have them obey you out of love, or they can obey you out of fear. Which would you like to have them do? Most parents tell me love. But when they get frustrated, when they become impatient, when they get angry, what do you resort to? Threats, timeouts, punishments, okay? And so your kids grow up trying to avoid punishment and getting rewards. And that is a very normal way of growing up. But which would you rather have them do? If you teach them that we're in this together, and when you do wrong, you break a bond that we have created among us. And if they know that they've broken that bond, their own guilt will redirect the ship. They don't need you to take the old belt out, or the old paddle, or the old pinch. My mom used to pinch, or the silent treatment, whatever. It all works, but the question is, do we want them to do it out of love or out of fear? And if you stop and think, in our own American justice, punishment is what prison's all about. And that's why I love this new motion that's happening, which is called restorative justice, which is dealing with the victims and the perpetrators to come together to realize that the bond of love that was supposed to be there was broken, and how do we mend it? Instead of just giving them 15 years to life or whatever for punishment. And there is no such thing as rehabilitation in jail. I'm sorry, but very, very few who leave really as good citizens. They all make it back at one time or another. And so, again, we see it in practice that if we really want justice, if we really want a mercy, we have to really show that. We really have to invite people into a reconciliation. Reconciliation is remembering, bringing back into membership. When people are estranged by actions and they're made to be estranged by their actions, reconciliation means that we're brought back together into the fold. But oh, how we like to excommunicate, don't we? We like to kick people out because they look different, they talk differently. Oh, they're living together in sin. And that's why I love Francis, who says, take people where they are. Remember that first scene on the first slide? Jesus is carrying not a lamb. Jesus is carrying a person. I love that because it says exactly what Pope Francis said his first week of his papacy is, we need to smell like the sheep we're shepherding. And if you know anything about sheep, they ain't clean animals. They are filthy, smelly. And if you really are shepherds, real shepherds, if you watch them, they shepherd from the back. They have little sheepdogs to keep the strays in the fold. And then they direct the flock going forward, but they have to lead from the back. And there's only two things sheep are really good at: eating and pooping. And if you're walking behind them, you better smell like the other half. by the time you finish the trek. That's what a good shepherd does. He smells like the sheep that he or she is shepherding, and we're all shepherds. How many of you are parents? How many of you are grandparents? You all. How many of you are teachers? Okay, when you teach, how many of you are counselors? You have lots of different sheep that you're called to shepherd. And we have to learn from the good shepherd. Interesting that he'd call himself the good shepherd, because a shepherd was the lowest job anybody ever wanted in the Jewish tradition. And he chose that to show, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd knows his flock, and his flock knows his voice, right? So you have to be able to spend a lot of time with your sheep in order for them to know your voice and to know God's voice. When I prepare couples for marriage, again, I always think globally that mercy and forgiveness starts at home. How many of you ever heard the thought about if you don't ever fight in front of your children? How many of you ever heard that? BS. If you fight in front of your children, it's okay. It's okay. The only thing is make sure you reconcile in front of them too. Because one of the worst things you can do to miseducate your children is to have a disagreement in front of them, and then you go behind closed doors, and then you work it out amongst yourselves, but they never see what you're doing. They never see that that's a possibility. They never know the process that you've taken in order to reconcile. So I'm saying is if you have a disagreement in front of your children, that's all right. Make sure and reconcile in front of them so that they see that disagreements are part of life, but so is the asking and giving of forgiveness. I'll give you an example of this that happened to me. Ever since I've been ordained, I've been kind of like the family priest. I do all the baptisms and a lot of the weddings and things. So I was ordained. My sister invited me to come and do the Mass of First Communion for her children in Mexico City, where she lives. And so I was staying at my sister's house, and my sister is like Martha in the coming gospel, you know. She worries about everything, all the details. And when she's like that, imagine what it's like inside the house. You know, you basically want to say, chill out, would you? You know, and all that. But, you know, and she just grinds her teeth even more. So anyway, she was all worried more about the party after the First Communion Mass than actually all of the details about the First Communion. So she and I had a little disagreement, little brother and sisterly spat, and we did it in front of her children. And at the end, I told her, get out, take a walk or a drive, go out for a half an hour, and when you come back, we'll talk. You know, well, anyway, my 8-year-old and 10-year-old niece and nephew come in after they see their mom storm out and take off. And they come over and they're almost crying, and they go, Tio Lalo, you guys really fought. And I go, yeah. And I said, are you worried? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, look, you two, do you ever fight? And I said, yes. Are you guys okay now? They go, yes. How did you get okay? Well, we worked it out. And he goes, yeah. Guess what? It makes no difference what age you are. My sister, your mother, and I have the same relationship you two have. You're going to fight all your life. But that's okay. In a little while, she's going to come back, and we're going to go right out there by that tree, and we're going to talk, and we're going to work it out. Just like you two work it out, you know? And it's a great teachable moment. But if you and your kids, you don't have those moments to teach, they never learn about forgiveness and reconciliation. And they don't learn, and they think that there's some magic that happens, but I'm out of the loop. Well, include them in the loop. Show them that it is possible for you to work things out, and they see it, And they feel, okay, I'm not going to worry about this thing. They learn that it's part and parcel of life. But if you don't, they're going to learn, oh my God, there's going to be an explosion. And then they never see how to do it, and they never learn how to do it. So part of it is also learning how to really love each other. And so 2 books that I use to help educate couples to communicate. One of them is called The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, who is a marriage counselor. And the other is called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. In the 5 love languages, he discovered that over the years of counseling that people tend to show their love in 5 ways. The first way is written up there is quality time. Now, people mistake quality time all the time. I tell them that the average American family spends 11 quality minutes a week. And they go, no way. That's got to be wrong. And I go, okay, let's examine it. Let's examine what you consider quality time. You sit down and watch a movie together. You spend 2 hours watching the movie. In those 2 hours, you're observing. There is no communication going on except that I feel comfortable being with you. I call that nice time and necessary time. But it becomes quality time when at the end of the movie you ask, did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you like about it? What did you learn about yourself? What did you hate about that? What is this and this? And you just go deeper and deeper and deeper and then connect it to your own lives. That becomes quality time. You can go out and hold hands and take a walk along and watch the sunset in silence. It's beautiful, nice time, necessary time. But it becomes quality time when you might take a step and say, you know, that reminds me of God. That reminds me of the first time we fell in love. Reminds me of our first sunset we saw together. You know, and you start to reminisce and talk. That's quality time. You take your kids to the soccer match. Nice time, necessary time. But if you want that to be a quality time experience, ask them, hey, I saw that you got along really well with your teammates. What was going on? How have you guys gotten along so great? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your coach? What have you learned about your teammates, etc.? And then all of a sudden you get them to talk. I've asked a lot of couples, when was the last time they had a serious conversation with their parents? You want to know what the most common answer is nowadays? None. Many couples coming to marriage will tell me, I've never had a serious conversation with my parents. And of course, I'm taken aback because what do you do now? I mean, here's a couple who neither one of the two have had modeled for them how to really express quality time as a couple. And so I learned on my own that to program in 3 hours of quality time every week. And I say, light a candle, begin with a prayer, because where 2 or more are gathered in my name, there's Christ among us. And then I'm going to give you some themes to talk about over the next 6 months. And then after that, I hope you get in the good habit of doing it so that you can do it on your own. And then you start looking forward to those 3 hours, because you are committing yourself to each other for life. Your children are an obligation, not a commitment. The commitment is you to him and him to you. But your children, you are obliged to raise them. If you don't raise them, you can be put in jail for negligence. You know, so your love for your children is an expression of the commitment you have to each other, but you are married to each other for life. You only have them for 25 years, if that. Beyond that, they become mooches, and it's your problem. I've had a lot of parents who have their 35-year-olds living at home, and they're complaining about their kids, and I go, well, you're the problem. Why should they move out? You give them everything. But ultimately, you're preparing for the moment you have an empty nest again. And so many divorces happen at the 25-year mark because they didn't grow up together. They didn't grow in love together. So quality time is key. The second one is physical touch. Physical touch isn't necessarily sex. It means holding hands, embracing, sitting next to each other, touching, giving each other foot rubs, massages, cuddling, snuggling. All of that's physical touch. To the person whose primary love language is physical touch, when the touch is obviously loving, it's kind of like the little doggy, you know? But you do it even if it's not your primary love language, because you know that that's what convinces your lover that you love her or love him. Words of affirmation. These are shown by, things that are very supportive. God, how lucky I am to have you in my life. Do you remember the movie Patton? Omar Bradley, when he sees the headline that Patton has just taken a new city, and he sees that, he knows that Patton has a copy of that newspaper. He says, George, you give him a headline and he's good for 3 miles. Basically what he's saying is George's primary love language was words of affirmation, because if you tell him he's done a good job, he's going to work ever harder for you, right? Acts of service and giving gifts are two sides of the same love language, really. You do things for your lover because you love her or you love him. And it's not just because it's birthday or February 14th or your anniversary. You do it because you just wanted to do it. You make her breakfast in bed, you make him, whatever you do for him, and just realize that, and you tell him, I did it because I was thinking of you and I love you. And giving of gifts, the same thing. You give a gift because you were thinking of your the person. And what I do is I have them choose the top 2 love languages, because I want them to understand that they may match, they may not, they may only share one, or they may not match at all. And if they don't match at all, it doesn't mean you're not loving each other, and it doesn't mean you're not called to be married. It means you got to work a little harder. In other words, if I know that by loving you the way I normally love isn't convincing you that you're loved, then I have to change by knowing his or her love language. I do this and they do this in order to convince you. It's work, and love is work. But you do it because you love each other. You are willing to do it. If you're not willing to do it, well, then you're on the slide out of your marriage. And that's why 55% of our marriages in this country end in divorce. Lack of communication. They're not willing to talk about what you need from each other. Oh, you should know me by now. Who knows? Who's a mind reader here? Anybody here a mind reader? How many times? You should know. What do you mean I should know? How am I going to know what you want right now? You don't assume. That's where the second book comes in a minute. So this is one of the books, and what I love, one of the exercises they have in the back, it says, how's your love tank? What it says is the author equates love and marriage as gasoline is to a gas tank of a car. A car can't run without gas. A marriage can't function without love. So they have this cute exercise that the couples do every day. When one of them or the other comes home from work, they ask each other, how's your love tank? In other words, what do you need from me right now to convince you I love you? And then you do it. And you have the courage to tell them. And you have none of this mind reading stuff. You do it because you're directly saying, you know what, I need a hug right now. Or, you know what, I need to talk to you for an hour because I had a bad day at work. I need some quality time. And then you get into the extrovert-introvert part, but that's later. That's for some other time. The second book is called The Four Agreements. The Four Agreements basically says that we all go through traumas in our life, and we make an agreement on how we're going to defend ourselves before the world. And unfortunately, it's usually negative. When I experience a trauma, somebody disrespecting me, for example, I make an agreement when I'm young to return a disrespect for a disrespect. And that's where dissing comes in, and that's where bullying comes in, you know. We see that all the time in our schools. It's a huge problem in our schools, you know. And so when you become more and more of an adult, you recognize what you're doing. And so you realize how harmful our words are. And so we make an agreement with ourselves that no matter what happens in my direction, I'm never going to use my spoken word or my written word to cause harm. In other words, I use it only impeccably. The second one is don't take anything personally. How many of you like to take things personally? How many of you get defensive when somebody critiques you or criticizes you? A lot, right? And the rest of you are liars. You didn't put your hand up. You know, we all take things personally, but it's interesting. Why do we give people who don't even know us the power to hurt us? The only question you should ask is, are they telling me the truth about myself or not? If they're telling you the truth, they've done you a favor. Don't kill the messenger. Let the message cause you to make a change in your life or not. Like, for example, if you like to tell little white lies and someone says, you know, you're a liar, you may not like the way he or she said it. You may not like that he or she said it, but is it true? And if it is, now you have a choice. Do I continue to lie, or do I become an honest person? They've done you a favor. Third one, never assume you know all the facts. You know, like let's say I do this first question on my first interview with a couple. I say, okay, right outside my window, your spouse-to-be is talking to a member of the opposite sex. What are the possibilities? And if I said that to you, what would you say? What could be happening outside there? Anything? Come on. Asking for directions. Asking for the time. Maybe they knew each other before in high school. Maybe they just met. Maybe they're a cousin or someone you haven't met before. All these are possibilities. Now, I've had a couple of couples when one of them says to me, well, they're cheating on me. I go, that's a possibility. Can you think of any others? And they said, no, they're cheating on me. So I turned to the other person and I said, do you ever feel trapped by their jealousy? And they go, as a matter of fact, I do. And I said, in the next 6 months of my preparing for you, if we can't work this out, I'm not doing your wedding. Because jealousy and envy are two sure ways of destroying a marriage. Who wants to stay with someone who doesn't trust you? You know? And both times after I said that, 2 days later, I get a phone call and says the marriage is off. And I go, thank you. I'm glad, because it wasn't going to be meant to be unless there was a huge amount of work that was going to be done. So never assume, because if you assume wrongly, and most of us do, you can cause a huge rift in your friendships, in your marriages, in your family, with your children. Because the moment your children or your marriage does not feel trusted, it's over. It really is. They're going to look for a way out, okay? And then the fourth one is very Ignatian. Basically, it says, I ask myself at the end of the day, you look in the mirror and you say, did I do my best today? If you can say yes, good, great. Don't judge it by your best yesterday or your best tomorrow, because we all have different energy levels. Just do your best each day, and that's all you can ask of yourself. Apply these 2 books, and you will learn how to be merciful and forgiving of yourself and others. and you will teach your children the same, because when you do apply the love languages to them, when they get to be teenagers, they won't rebel. The two reasons teenagers rebel is they don't love me and they don't understand me. They'll know that you love them, and they'll know that you understand them. So if they rebel and start putting earrings where they don't belong or tattoos all over the place, it's because of peer group pressure and not because of you, okay? Anyway, I'm hoping that today was helpful to get us to be men and women for others, and to understand how to be great in the home, and to be loving and forgiving and merciful and forgiving. And hopefully you learned something today, and thank you for your invitation to come, and God bless you all.